month of the year. But no, his idea was that students would study African American history all year, and then it would culminate in a celebration in February. So Dr. Woodson, seminal scholar, visionary, someone who took history seriously, and in fact took change and progress seriously by indeed trying to get people to understand and study the African American experience. So anyway, that starts with Dr. Woodson. Let me mention a couple more things though, because I could talk about Woodson all day. Being the president of the South has been a really wonderful experience. And I just love talking about Woodson because he's sort of my own model. In 1937, as I said, one of his main goals was to make sure that children, young people understood what was called at that time Negro history. So in 1937, he started publishing the Negro History Bulletin. And so as a way, again, of giving teachers the resources that they needed to teach the African American experience. Finally, in 1933, he published a seminal book, a major book, one of the first books I ever read as a historian, as a college student actually. It was called The Miseducation of the Negro. And in that, he pointed out how the miseducation of African Americans indeed led to their belief that they were less than whites and so on. There's a couple stories in there that I always tell, but I'll just tell one of them. In that very first chapter, he talks about a president of a HBCU asking his historian, his history professor, to develop a course on Negro history. And that professor responded to him, "I didn't go to college to waste my time studying the Negro." So indeed, that was the attitude at that time. So again, I'm going to paint this picture of Woodson and the association so we understand the importance of his contributions to our life today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Chambers and President Delaney. That was just wonderful. And I am just so thrilled to be here as a discussant in this workshop. I am in some way substituting for Betty Gardner and Barbara Spencer Dunn, who could not be at the conference this year, unfortunately. But we did work together, and I am just so thrilled to be able to share a little bit of ASALH's role in the reopening of the Woodson home in 2023. In the summer of 2021, a letter from the United States Department of Interior was addressed to me as then president of ASALH, and it was sent to the ASALH headquarters and written on July 30th of that year by Kim A. Hall, Area Director for Interior Region 1, the area covering the North Atlantic and Appalachian. The letter announced the good news that the Woodson Home Committee of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History had received the National Capital Area's 2020 George and Helen Hartzog Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service as a volunteer service group. Now, Hartzog was an early director of the National Park Service. And I don't know if everyone can see the PowerPoint, those on Zoom. So let me just read the first paragraph to you. It reads, "Dear Dr. Higginbotham, it is my great pleasure to congratulate the Association for the Study of African American Life and History's Woodson's Home Committee on receiving the National Capital Area's 2020 George and Helen Hartzog Award for outstanding volunteer service as a volunteer group. The committee members' volunteer service to Carter G. Woodson Home National Historic Site exemplifies the grit, dedication, and heart advocated by George B. Hartzog. I want to talk to you today a little bit about that grit, dedication, and heart. And this is a prestigious and competitive award. And so we take great pride in receiving it. This letter, as I said, spoke of the special qualities of the committee that merited this award, grit, dedication, and heart. The letter described the work of the committee as crucial to the mission of the National Park Service. Now, in August of last year, we were also talked about in the newsletter from the National Capital Parks East, which featured the Woodson Home Committee's leadership in its coverage of the committees receiving the Hartzog Award. And you can see there on the far right is Betty Gardner, and then on the far left is Barbara Spencer Dunn. And while the award was truly deserving, I really would like to share with you a longer and fuller narrative. And again, one with the grit and dedication and heart. Because the work of Betty Gardner, who was chair from the inception, and Barbara Spencer Dunn, the co-chair of the Woodson Home Committee, spans nearly 2 decades of work with the National Park Service in regard to the various stages of the Woodson Home rehabilitation. Now, the ASALA Committee is unique in its association with the Park Service. Through congressional legislation, the Woodson Home Committee of ASALA was established in 2006 at the behest of the National Park Service to serve as the official liaison between the National Park Service and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Now, this legislation differs from the more familiar selection of a body of individuals who serve as commissioners. If you think about some of the other sites, such as the Mary McLeod Bethune site, you have individuals who are nominated and who have to go through an approval process. I was one of those commissioners for that site. But we're unique because there's no individual named, it's the entire committee. The Park Service understood the need for content specialists, meaning the need for ASALA to be a major partner in guiding the development of the general management and long-term interpretation once the Woodson House was designated. Now, the house was designated as a National Historic Site in 2003. And so the house became the 389th unit of the National Park System. Now, from its inception, the Woodson Home Committee has been made up of specialists in public history, United States and African American history, African history, as well as experts in museum curation. From 2008 to the present, the committee has been intimately involved in the development of the various interpretive plans and in the articulation of the long-term vision of the management of the Woodson Home Historic Site. At times, the entire committee was involved in face-to-face sessions held in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere with National Park Service representatives. Our involvement facilitated the development of the final long-range interpretive plan. And once that plan was finalized, then the actual physical restoration of the Woodson home could take place and continue to operate. So when I became president in 2016, I began to go with Betty Gardner and Barbara Spencer Dunn to the Park Service meetings And at those meetings, I witnessed unfailing commitment to both organizations to seeing the completion of the renovated Woodson home. Now, we attended meetings which included park representatives from not only National Parks East, but from Denver, Colorado, from Harpers Ferry, Virginia. The meetings focused on gaining knowledge, specific knowledge of Woodson and the Black history movement that he created. I like to remind people, Woodson's Asala did the work. It wasn't just simply Woodson all by himself. It was the movement that he created. This is what made him so special. So we brought our expertise to both broad-ranging and more narrowly specific questions. Let me give you an example of some of the broad-ranging questions. I shall never forget the Big Idea workshop that we had on Friday, June 28th, 2019. Now, this was an activity led by the National Park Service, and Representative Linda Lutz-Ryan emailed Betty, Barbara, and I to come to this meeting for the purpose of coming up with a conceptual statement that summed up the importance of the site at the biggest of levels. Well, after several hours of brainstorming by the three of us, in addition to the Park Service folks, Vince, you were there, and also Tara Morrison, the National Capital Area Superintendent, and also a representative from the youth organization, Kiamsha. And it took us hours. We looked and we thought, and we threw out ideas, we threw away ideas, but we finally came up with the big idea. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, started a movement to uplift people through knowledge. And I think we all left thinking that this was collaboration at its best. But Asala has played many roles, from conversations in selecting color styles and artwork in the spaces that Asala will occupy in the newly renovated site and in its exhibit site. And I want to emphasize this because, as President Dulaney said, we were housed in Woodson's home. We will return to the Woodson site as an organization. In addition to Betty and Barbara and me, Professor Pero Dagbovi, also a longstanding member of Asala and the Woodson Committee, played a key role as a scholarly expert. And he served as a Park Service consultant with the Howard and Rivas design team, which was responsible for the exhibit phase. Now, from a more specific perspective, we face questions as to, well, what would be the exhibits? What was the correct style of, and this is an example that the Park Service wrote to me. When Woodson graduated from Harvard with the PhD, what was the correct style for the robe and cap and gown that he was to wear? Because we wanted everything to be perfect. And the Park Service wanted, of course, everything to be perfect. When I got the letter, I had to go to the archivists at Harvard and ask them, what was the style in 1912? Because cap and gowns actually changed over the years. And I'm proud to say that Asala played a crucial role, not only in the interpretation of exhibit content, but also in the acquisition of artifacts. Barbara and Betty were able to solicit and provide historic photographs for the legacy exhibit that covers the years from 1977 to 2000. Former Asala President John Fleming made it possible for me to retrieve many of Dr. Woodson's artifacts, his belongings, that had gone to the Museum of African American History in Wilberforce, Ohio. Now, this was no easy task. Not only did I have to go to Wilberforce, and I did that on December 22nd, 2017, and I met with the director, Charles Wash. And then the museum had to locate and de-accession approximately 140 items. And it took months to do this. because they had to go through a special process with the state. And I want to sincerely thank Director Charles Wash, because he was completely supportive of my request. Now, as I sat there in the museum, in Wilberforce, and they're bringing out just a few of Woodson's things, I must tell you, it was emotional. It was an emotional moment for me to see the things that belong to Dr. Woodson. And when he wrote to me to tell me about the artifacts, he said, well, we have shirts and jackets and hats. There's a chair, a desk, 3 or 4 trunks, file cabinets, other office furniture. Now, I didn't get to see all that, but they did bring a few things out to me, and I did take photographs. And the one that was the most meaningful to me, was these 2 things: Dr. Woodson's shoes. He walked all around the Shaw neighborhood. He walked everywhere. And he wore shoes. And those are some of the shoes, one of the pairs of shoes he wore. And then most touching, of course, is his spin garn medal. He got that spin garn medal in 1926. And he got it after founding Negro History Week. So that tells you what the AACP thought of the importance of Black history and his role. And I tell you, when I saw that first, tears came to my eyes, because I knew that these would be the objects that would fill not only the museum area, but when you go into the house area, you see this larger site is not only Woodson's home at 1538 9th Street, but it's the 2 abutting places. But in his home, which on the first floor was the office, and on the second floor was also office, and on the 3rd floor, which he used to like to call his attic, that's where he lived. And so we'll be able to see his living space and see some of his clothing. It's just so moving. The other thing I want to talk to you about is updating the Woodson home. So Asala was given the opportunity to, through our National Historic Research Group, to have scholars update the home. Because as I said, the home was actually in 2003 made a National Historic Site, but so much new information about Woodson has come to our attention since 2003. They wanted that information to update. And so the Park Service has criteria. And so we were asking for criteria 2 and criteria 3. Now the update for criteria 3 says that properties associated with individuals who've made a significant or exceptional contribution to American history, and the individual's association with the property must be connected to the specific period when he or she made his contributions to American history. And so the Woodson home was, as I said, more than his residence, it was this movement. And so the writers of the report asked for the dating for criterion 2. And I also want to emphasize that the writers of this report, Amber Wiley, a architectural historian, and Maria McWhorter, a historian of Washington, D.C., did an excellent job of updating. But we did something additional. We also asked for criteria 3. And criteria 3 speaks about properties that represent some great idea or ideal of the American people. Now, this criterion relates to properties that represent an overarching, unique ideal. And this ideal could be a belief or a principle or a goal. I quote what the website says. It says, under this criterion are associated endeavors or goals of the highest order, such as attaining democracy, achieving freedom, and securing rights. And then the following sentence, criteria 3 is rarely used. So the updated report by Amber Wiley and Maria McWhorter emphasized the basis for the house being designated as a criteria 3 landmark. And this is what they wrote. They said the property is eligible under criterion 3 because it demonstrates and has come to symbolize Americans' faith in education as a central role in combating racism and all forms of discrimination, and in achieving true freedom and equality. And then they go on to say, these ideals are represented in Woodson's work through ASALH to promote educational pedagogy and information that debunked racist histories that upheld Jim Crow oppression of Black people. And you heard President Delaney emphasize this. Wiley's and McWhorter's extremely well-researched and documented report then had to get a hearing before the National Historic Landmark Committee before it could be approved. And that hearing occurred on October 21st, 2021 in a virtual meeting because of the pandemic. And the Woodson home was one of several groups that were being considered at that time. And the way this goes, you have to have people in addition to the writer of the report. So Amber Wiley was there to make the case. Tara Morrison was there, again, the superintendent of the Park Service East, to also speak. And I was there to speak on behalf of the Woodson Committee as to why this site should be dedicated to this rarely given criterion. And I was given a few minutes to explain, and I'd like to just share some of my comments with you. This is what I said. Carter G. Woodson and the Black History organization and movement he founded and led until his death in 1950 sought to answer questions fundamental to our understanding of ourselves as a nation. And it is an interesting fact that the headquarters of this movement, which was also his home, resided in the nation's capital, a city apropos for examining the American heritage and the ideals and principles foundational to who we profess to be as a people. I submit that our nation is indebted to Woodson for addressing questions that led to profoundly transformative answers. The first question was, what is truth? The second question, who are we the people? And the third question, what will be the story of America? In 2026, we will be celebrating the 250th year story of the United States of America. And we will, this nation, proudly boast of our glorious Declaration of Independence, with its words asserting self-evident truths and the inalienable rights to life, to liberty, meaning freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. But in reality, those inalienable rights were not given, and they were not evident at all for people of African descent, enslaved by many of the founding fathers themselves. Men who even used the word slave throughout their writings and discussions that would eventually lead to the Declaration of Independence. But when Englishmen spoke of themselves as slaves of King George, they used the word slave in a metaphorical way. So from the very beginning of our nation, the first question arises, how does America define the literal meaning of truth, given its self-evident truths? And because the Revolutionary War and the great victory of the American patriots, the United States government was formed with a constitution that begins with the powerful words, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. But right there emerges the second question Woodson had to answer. Who are we in we the people? In searching for truth, Carter G. Woodson rejected racist theory and instead sought out facts, what he called the scientific study of history. When Woodson was at Harvard in the early 20th century, and President Delaney has said this, social Darwinist theory ran rampant. such that history books, the media, film, literature, the arts, all portrayed Black people as an inferior race that could be justifiably treated that as second-class citizens through Jim Crow laws. Now, Woodson never lived to see Brown v. Board. He never lived to see the civil rights movement of the 1960s, but that never deterred his pursuit of knowledge in the fight for the American ideals of equality and justice for all. And he discovered the primary sources. His movement filled in the gaps, corrected the fallacies, and Woodson brought knowledge of African-American life and history, not only to academia, but to local communities. His Black history movement desegregated. In this struggle for desegregation, he desegregated American history. And by so doing, he helped to make a more perfect union because of its more truthful story. And the model and legacy of historical inclusion paved the way for other neglected groups, for example, women and specific ethnic groups and peoples with disabilities, to make known that they too are represented in We the People and in the story of America. Well, the National Historic Landmark Commission approved our updates. Now they recommended it to the National Park Service, and the National Park Service will have to make the decision whether the house fits both criteria 2 and criteria 3. And now I want to end on a really wonderful celebration, and that is the birthday of Carter G. Woodson. Every year, the National Park Service and ASALH has a party, a birthday party for Woodson. It doesn't always fall on his birthday, December 19th, but it's a great moment. We even have a big birthday cake. And one of the really sad things about the virtual, and the virtual has been wonderful, and we've reached many more people who could possibly have come, but there was no birthday cake. And these events include young and old in the audience and on the program, speakers and musical performances. We had a couple of years of Woodson reenactor. We have participation by our Kiamsha youth groups. We get greetings from representatives of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, Woodson's fraternity, and also Robert Stanton's fraternity. We hear from Robert Stanton, who served as the first Black and probably still the only Black director of the Park Service. He was appointed by President Clinton. And we always hear from the DC representative to Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who played a crucial role in advocating for the Woodson home in 2003 when it became. And she comes every year to advocate year after year. But for the birthday celebration in December 2021, Betty Gardner and Barbara Spencer Dunn approached the National Park Service with the idea to do something different, to have an all-day symposium. You know, usually we have a few hours in commemoration of Woodson's birthday. Now, Woodson was born on December 19th, 1875, but the symposium was held on December 18th, and it was titled A Bold Vision, revisiting the life and legacy of Dr. Carter G. Woodson and what it means today. And I was really excited about the idea because my presidency of ASALH was soon coming to an end. It ended on December 31st. The birthday symposium gave me the opportunity to speak about the lasting importance to me of Woodson and the Woodson home from a personal, an individual, and a collective perspective. From the perspective of what he had given to me and my family, because my father had worked with Woodson, but also what he had given to all African Americans and to the world. Woodson gave us so many things, and one such gift, like an heirloom to future generations, was his home. The inspiring remarks of the symposium speakers will be published in the winter issue of the Journal of African American History. So please look out for that issue. And then finally, on December 30th, 2021, I had the tremendous privilege of signing the agreement with the Park Service as to Asala's return as a physical presence and programmatic partner in the Woodson Home National Historic Site. I consider it a great honor to have been president of Asala, but especially during the years when our partnership with the National Park Service, working with the Asala Home Committee, led by Betty Gardner and Barbara Spencer Dunn, brought the Woodson home and the houses abutting it out of a lingering, unfinished stasis. In fact, they were in a state of disrepair. And they are now, you will see a magnificent rehabilitation and renovation. And it will be completed. The site will be open in 2023, and what a day of rejoicing it will be.
All right, before I call up Vince Vase, I just want to take a point of privilege as the chair of this panel to say I had the tremendous privilege of putting together that draft agreement. But I'm so glad that we did. No. I just, you know, it's fun that we had that opportunity to renew our relationship, and you know, now we're continuing in that effort. And so Vince Vase will come up and share, you know, a presentation about all of this effort that was done between both Park Service and Asala. Vince.
Right. But it's a very humbling experience to be here on this day with such eminent people here in my presence. And in a way, when I flew into Birmingham, I drove to the Birmingham jail. I even drove to Selma to the Pettus Bridge before the sun went down to get a picture of it. And what impressed me was it was really when they talked about the foot soldiers and the army, and it was all these people over generations that made this happen. And that's what this is about. And the saving and the preservation and the interpretation of the Woodson home represents the same thing. And that in a very real sense, it is an act of civic activism to save this site. And the people in this room were instrumental in that. And Dr. Higginbotham did a very eloquent job about Asala and the Park Service. I would like to do a special shout out, though, to Robert Stanton, again, former director of the National Park Service. And my talk will have his instrumental role in this process of saving the house itself. But I also like to bring greetings from Tara Morrison, the superintendent of the site, as well as a good friend, acquaintance to all of us, Dr. Joy Kennard, who had worked for a number of years at National Capital Parks East. And now she's superintendent a lot closer to home here in Montgomery at the Tuskegee Institute. This is an auspicious year because it was 100 years ago, 1922, that Dr. Woodson purchased the house. And I would say that it's also a historic fact, the efforts to save the house began 50 years ago. That's how long, 50 years. So, I mean, Dr. Woodson got the house 100 years ago. Half of that time is preserving his legacy and saving the house. And I titled my talk, Enabling These Walls to Talk. You know, if these walls could talk, what stories could they tell? And saving the walls and interpreting those walls is our major effort here. 100 years after Dr. Woodson purchased this house here on 1538 9th Street, the National Park Service and Asala were in the final phase of this 50-year journey to preserve, rehabilitate, and interpret the building as a premier historic site in the nation. The exhibit development represents close collaboration between the Association for the Study of African American Life and History and the National Park Service. And it was ASALH and the NPS that guided the design firm. And that you will see, we'll give you a taste of the future exhibits and how immersive they are. And they will immerse visitors in the historic texture of Dr. Woodson's era, but they will also speak with a modern voice, and that balance of preserving the era of Woodson, but also being relevant to new and future generations of America. That's a tricky thing to do, a very difficult thing to do. And because ASALH was involved in this process, not only do we have the accurate historic information, but Dr. Woodson's spirit is present in the exhibit in the house. We look at these steps here in this first slide. Make sure I got mine. You can see the railings there, the original railings. I mean, those are the actual steps he walked up in 1922. You see the door handle and the preserved lock mortise. You know, you may just say, well, it's just a lock mortise, but that's the lock mortise he put the key in when he turned the key to open the door 100 years ago. It's a regular humble brick row house, but during his lifetime, that house served as his home, headquarters for ASALH, the publishing company, Associated Publishers, an archives for Black history, and again, the headquarters of ASALH. So all these uses in this one row house. And again, we're in this countdown here. So what was this journey to get there? So again, the journey really began, I would say, 50 years ago. So a little bit of context here. It's again 1538 9th Street. The actual house dates to the 1870s, and it includes the two adjacent row houses to accompany visitors. It's been vacant for a number of years. Now, in 2001, it was placed on the National Trust for Historic Preservation 11 most dangerous or 11 most endangered historic places list. So it was in very fragile condition in 2021. But actually, we have to go back, and I'm not going to paraphrase Mr. Stanton's words. I will read his words because it goes back to the 1970s. So, quote, with the designation as a National Historic Landmark. So, quote, the designation of the Carter G. Woodson home as a National Historic Landmark was the result of the excellent work of Vince and Bob DeForest. They formed a company that was awarded a National Park Service contract to study and produce recommendations for increased recognition of the contributions of African Americans in the development of our nation. Over 60 National Historic Landmarks were approved as an outcome of this major contract, and several became units of the National Park System. The contract awarded to Vince and Bob DeForest, I should point out, was made possible by then NPS Director George B. Hartzog Jr. So there we go, Hartzog again, and was conducted in the context of celebrating / commemorating the nation's bicentennial anniversary in 1976. So again, we see these recommitments to those ideals. 1976, of course, the same year, Negro History Week becomes Black History Month. And then, as Mr. Stanton wrote, I first met Vince DeForest and Bob in 1971 while I was serving as superintendent of National Capital Parks East. So again, we're looking, Mr. Stanton, that was about 50 years ago when you were there, and we're awful grateful to you, sir. However, also recognizing Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton deserves full credit for introducing legislation that authorized the Secretary of the Interior to conduct a special resource study for the feasibility of the home becoming a unit of the National Park System. Now, yesterday at the plenary session, for those of you who were there, they talked that one of the themes was how law shapes public opinion and shapes the culture of a nation, in some cases for very good and for some cases very bad. And they were talking about a lot of Supreme Court rulings in the law, but don't forget, laws, it was a public law, specifically Public Law 06-349 in the year 2000, 22 years ago, that authorized the special resources study for the Woodson home. That was a public law. It introduced on the base these findings, recommendations that would authorize the establishment of the home as the Carter G. Woodson Home National Historic Site, a unit of the park system. And then the legislation later was approved during the George W. Bush administration in 2003. I also like to add that Mr. Stanton, while serving with the National Park Service in the Clinton administration, posed as the National Capital Regional Director, and then later the Director of the Park Service, he directed that the completion of this study be given a high priority, and it was. Later on, while serving as the Senior Advisor to the Interior Secretary in the Obama administration, Mr. Stanton was in a position to advocate that the National Park Service budget request include funding for the work that is now currently underway at the home. No question about it. What was most helpful in securing these funds in the president's budget for the National Park Service was Congresswoman Norton's strong, passionate, and persuasive letter sent directly to President Obama. So there is no one person who can claim this. It is literally a legion of people, and each person has their own piece in it. Timeline. 2008 was a historic structures report. And this is one thing that's kind of also the unsung heroes. You just can't say, okay, we saved it, and now we're going to go ahead and fix it up. You have to study it, just like Dr. Woodson studied exhaustively, footnoted everything. Park Service does that too. So the historic structures report, what is the history of this structure? What is the fabric of the structure? So that we don't take a wall down that was there when Woodson was there, so that every piece of original fabric could be scrupulously preserved as it was. In addition to that, 2012 was the historic resource study written by Dr. Dag Bovey, titled Willing to Sacrifice. And you can find this online. It's a fascinating read. So that way, when we go to interpret it, well, what are the major stories? What is the body of history relating to this site? So you have the historic structures report that is the fabric of the site, and then you have the historic resource study that is the history as pertains to the site. And here's how it looks, and you get a glimpse of how it will look. The actual Woodson home is the red brick facade, and then this legislation included for the procurement not only of the purchase and the acquisition, not only of that, but also the two adjacent row homes. Dr. Woodson could have a sala and the history and the archives in one row house, but we can't contain his legacy in that one row house. Okay, we need the adjacent two. For the full museum, the permanent exhibits, the offices for a sala, and offices for the National Park Service. And then Dr. Woodson's house there has the red brick to distinguish it from the other two. And you can also see that Art Deco font as a way of keeping in the theme of that 1930s, 40s era when Dr. Woodson was here. A little bit for, if you're curious, who are the architects that is currently rehabilitating the adjacent row homes with Milton Schnoren. Architects past projects included the Statue of Liberty, the Gateway Arch, Nassau Hall at Princeton, and the Count Basie Theater in New Jersey. Howard and Reeves, they're the exhibit designers. They designed the exhibit, and right now, as I speak to you, the plans are already completed. The design is done. We're moving into the fabrication, the actual building out of those exhibits. You can see they have an impressive track record with the National Civil Rights Museum, the National September 11th Memorial Museum, and others. I will say, though, that it was Asala and the National Park Service who gave them the content and the knowledge to go forth. And I will give them credit, though, for securing the services of Dr. Dag Bovey very early on in the process. You know, and again, what went into this? again, the Asala offices, the ranger office, the visitor flow, like how many visitors can you get through? All these details you don't think about. When you're a visitor, you just go and you see it. But how many visitors can go through during the course of a day? How many during the course of an hour? How long will it take to read all of this? And what will be the flow? So again, providing that balance, and even details of how many square feet, and even 1 square foot either way. And Dr. Higginbotham, I remember those meetings too. I remember where 1 foot meant that you had to move the whole elevator, which meant that you couldn't put certain things in a room. So then we had to rework the math. It was all these incredible details. And then the focus groups, and there were a number of them. I'm highlighting this one here, March 17, 2018. We've had groups of teachers and educators, tour group operators, local residents, and a special hats off to Kiamsha, because as great all these studies are and everything, if you want the youth perspective, you have to have the youth. It's that simple. I can't speak for the youth. It's been a while since I was a youth, and every day gets a little further. And that was how we're able to balance. We need to keep it relevant. What do they find engaging? What do they want? Let's listen to them. And that fed right back into that exhibit design process. New lesson plans. So we don't want to wait until the place is open and people are coming to have our lesson plans ready. So shout out to Dr. LeVar Neal, who worked with us to write some lesson plans. They're online now, so that when we cut the ribbon and the school buses start coming, we're ready to go. The lesson plans are there. Again, working with the solid. Okay, I independently took this out too. I did move the shoes to the other side of the slide though, so it's not exactly, but Dr. Hickman, you're choking, I'm choking up too with the shoes. When I walk down the streets, like he walked down these streets, they called him the bookman, and the shoes are there. I never thought the shoes would come back. I thought, okay, there's certain things, but not the shoes. And it's those items, those everyday items that are just amazing. And the artifacts, it's the artifacts, it's the history that really provide that living quality. How close can you come? That's how big his feet were. That's how tall he was. I mean, he's not physically here anymore, but through these items, you can get that sense of presence, keeping the Woodson home alive. And I'd like to do a shout out for you, Michael, who in another life ran his own cultural consultant, and he actually connected us with and hired Mr. Hamlet, Dexter Hamlet, noted actor who actually does a spot-on portrayal of Dr. Woodson. The actual Woodson home has opened temporarily. It's since closed, but we opened that one row home for about a year and a half, so the visitors could enjoy it while funding and everything was teeing up to do the full rehabilitation of the adjacent row homes. And so we had to put life into that place really fast. We had empty rooms. So we got an old typewriter off eBay. Mike Chambers helped us with Mr. Hamlet. We dressed some of our rangers up as the secretaries of Dr. Woodson. And rumor has it that even a particular ranger even stole a wooden desk from headquarters, put it on a pickup truck and put it in there and everything to give a living quality. And we had over 3,000 visitors in the course of a few months just going through it when it was an empty house. But now we're going to the next level. As a National Historic Site, we're going to have these new waysides that we say in the lingo on the street to invite visitors to come in, to inspire passersby. And then, like Dr. Higginbotham alluded to about the color schemes and everything. How do you keep Woodson's presence? How do you balance that modern relevancy? Well, why don't you go to what Woodson published? He had a clear aesthetic in his books. There's no happenstance of the fonts and the color schemes. And so that was the direct inspiration for the color schemes that you will see throughout all of the exhibits. We even went with that Art Deco font, departing a bit from our National Park Service, NPS Rawlinson, which is still in other places in the mansion, but some of the headers, we got that Art Deco font. And then again, you will have using books was a constant theme. The books that inspired Dr. Woodson, those that he wrote that inspired others. So this is a artist rendering. We'll have some more animated renderings soon as you come in to give visitors a sense of arrival. If we could have the next slide deck up really quick, that would be great. And as they change out the slide deck, there was a very conscious decision to not put a lot of the modern touch screens and interactives in the actual home that Dr. Woodson lived. And so that's the good thing about having the adjacent row home. And then Dr. Woodson's house is going to be as it was when he was first served.
Question, that looks like the monument that's also down the street from the house. Okay, did y'all do that deliberately?
That was done by Washington, D.C.
Okay,
So,
but the interior sort of.
yes, that curvature, yes, inspired.
Okay,
This is a better idea of what it'll look like. Again, you see the colors of fonts and books and giving that sense of arrival. And then I would also like to highlight that the other great benefit of the adjacent row homes is to make this site fully accessible. So for example, we needed the adjacent row homes to put a large elevator in so that folks that can't go up that narrow turning flight of stairs can now enjoy all 3 floors of the Woodson home. In addition to that, there'll be an audio loop. So for those who cannot read the exhibits, there will be an audio program. So it will be fully accessible so that every visitor will be able to hear the story of Dr. Woodson. Braille, there's also a Braille map that people will be furnished as well. Again, this is the other side as you come into the entranceway here. Newly commissioned art, so it's going to be a new woodcut. You know, a lot of in his books, he had those 1930s woodcuts that you see. We're in the spirit of that, in the process of securing an artist to do a woodcut, and there'll be a newly piece of art that the Park Service will own that we'll be able to use throughout the museum exhibits. Some of the museum exhibits, again, using books as that overriding theme. And one of the things that Dr. Woodson is really my hero is he has a foot in the working class and a foot in academia. And, you know, the fact he was a coal miner. My great-grandparents were coal miners, you know, and, you know, we'll have a reproduction of his coal mining, you know, clothing. You also see things like the miner's lamp, light, and the concept of enlightenment. But then also, as Dr. Higginbotham was talking about, the cap and gown, you know, and again, all these details, what did it look like, you know, and every nuance, the chairs, the books, the signed associated publisher. If you had to have, well, I can't say I have a favorite artifact because they're all my favorite, but this is certainly on the top list. And I'm proud to say that the original sign, yes, is conserved and will be on display inside the Woodson home, but an exact replica of it will once again be on the outside of the Woodson home. So once again, associated publishers will be seen from the street. In that context of the site within the broader neighborhood, Dr. Woodson's suit on display. And then again, one of the elements, one of many elements that Asala helped us on are these flip books. And I would say that only members of the long-standing members of Asala would know who some of the folks were who played roles like in the 1960s, 70s, early 80s. You know, people come and go, and they'll be, so that visitors will be able to touch screen interactives and go down about the history. So it's Asala's history and Woodson's history. I would also like to give a shout out for Dr. Higginbotham at a profound quote that was said, in addition to the one that guided another one was, Woodson is Asala and Asala is Woodson. And when Dr. Higginbotham said that in that planning meeting, you could hear a pin drop for like a good minute, and then the meeting went on. And that really provided a lot of guidance, consciously and subconsciously. A little bit of layout, and then I'll conclude. Storage room where we're showing some of the scales. So as much of those collections items as can be shown will be. The first floor really was the operations room where the secretaries for Asala worked, the packing and shipping room, the storage room for the books, the scales. Even talking to Robert Best, who was 97 years old when we talked to him. We actually got to speak with somebody who actually worked for Dr. Woodson in the packing and shipping room, telling us what it was like when he was a youngster working for Dr. Woodson. I mean, the immediacy. The other one of these famous Skurlock photographs, and these are great for a number of reasons. One, it's enabling us to furnish his study and library exactly as it was in his time. We know what it looked like because of the photographs. The other is two of the key items, the counting machine and that step stool are actually coming back to the Woodson site, and they're going to go right back to the original spot that they were that you see in the photograph. Like, how close can you come? Pretty close. And Dr. Delaney, you mentioned miseducation of the Negro. Well, how powerful is it to walk into his study where he wrote that? I mean, you're standing on the same ground that Dr. Woodson wrote that seminal work. And then the other level of detail to share with you, if you look in the center, there's going to be a short video clip. It's about 17 seconds long. It was taken. It's like a silent movie kind of thing in the 1930s that shows Dr. Woodson at his desk moving some papers around. And if you look behind him, you'll see a calendar. And what we did was we took freeze frames and froze it at like a microsecond and then enlarged it so we could get the date off the calendar, and so that we could do a screen capture and reproduce the calendar exactly. Like, that's the level of detail. If you're curious, it was 1933, West Virginia Paper and Pulp Company. So again, these little details, his affinity to West Virginia, where he was when he was a coal miner, like, those little details are important because it provides that living quality. And then finally, the bedroom where Dr. Woodson passed. So again, when we look at that, we look at a person who, again, spending 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week, gave it all for the cause, and even passed in the house himself. And so that's where I say that it's a historic site, but it's also a monument at the same time. And then people will, after they leave the house, there's modern galleries, because, what is the future? What is the legacy? What is that next? What's next? So history empowers, history enlightens. Anyone who's ever taught history knows that sometimes you get those kids in the class who, why do I have to study history? This is why you have to study history. And Asala has a living presence here too, as the theme of the year changes, and that's going to be reflected in these exhibits. And Asala's role of history preserved. How was the house saved? I've heard in other sessions in this very conference, the importance of preserving these sites, and how do you preserve them, and how do you preserve their originality? And so we're going to have before and after, and also in the context of other historic sites, like the preservation of the Douglas home, which, by the way, this is also the 60th year of the Douglas home's acquisition into the Park Service, as well as the 100th anniversary of the mortgage burning party that early preservationists like the Frederick Douglass Memorial Historical Association did to save the Douglas home. So a real landmark year in preservation. And then history speak. History is yours to make. So just like in the spirit of Dr. Woodson, that challenge to the future, that challenge to future generations. And again, the words of Dr. Woodson: let truth destroy the dividing prejudices of nationality and teach universal love without distinction of race, merit, or rank. 1926. So, ladies and gentlemen, and Michael, I think we have a special rendition of the future exhibit. Thank you.
That is correct. So I want to just say one, thank you to the fellow panelists here, Marvin, Evelyn, and Vince, for sharing your sharing your respective opening, and then certainly the Asala relationship, and Vince, giving us that deep dive into the oh, yeah. So, before I hit play, now that it's loaded here, Vince, as he mentioned, and I think even Evelyn had mentioned, the Woodson reenactor, right? My involvement with the Woodson home site predated my even joining Park Service, where, Vince and I had kind of crossed paths through another project that I had, and he said, "Hey, Humanities in Public, it's the name of my consulting business." He said, "That's pretty cool, hip, tell me more." And I thought he was asking, what is it in terms of like, what is this, do you really know what you're doing kind of thing? And that was not at all his intent. His intent was, he kind of, I think, was tracking on what it is that I did do, and that I could bring some of that to the Park Service. So when the home opened, it was completed in 17. He was really responsible for saying, "Hey, can you develop something?" And so that actor Dexter Hamlet, who is in there, we went down to Atlanta to research at Emory's Stuart A. Rose Library, the collections that they have. We consulted with Dr. Dag Bovey. And so a combination of Dag Bovey's book and Jacqueline Goggins' book, that really, and then I wrote the script, and then we had to cast an actor. And there are only two guys that have responded. And this one guy looked very similar to Morris Chestnut. Like, he can't do it. He was a great actor. And then Dexter comes in. And I was like, this is it. And so then the costume, his suit, having it very similar pinstripe, the shoes, are kind of the boot. I'm sure there's an actual name for those type of dress shoes, but the boot Oxford, we made certain to go. And so I poured a team together of the necktie, that's right, which is actually a tie similar to what Woodson wore. So bringing that same spirit of trying to bring to life Dr. Woodson and his legacy. And I'm just privileged and honored that I've had an opportunity to be a part of this project and to continue what so many before me have been able to do. That when this presentation idea came up, I have a person that I knew out in California that's into tech. And I said, "Hey, can we do a virtual scan of the house so that people can virtually get a taste of what the house will look like when it is complete?" So we contracted with them to come in and scan. ArtMerse is the name of the company. So what you're about to see is just that you are about to virtually enter the home and what it will look like. And the scan was completed was conducted during construction. So you'll see a bit of the construction in the beginning, and then you'll see and this is a world premiere because so they just finished it. And I'm sure we'll make some revisions, but this version has never been seen before. I have not even seen the full thing. So I hope that you all enjoy this, and we'll have Q&A afterwards.
Thank you.
So as you can see, you know, the video definitely helps to at least give a early sense of what this will look like. And as you can tell from Vince, Evelyn, and Marvin's presentation, and even the investment that the Park Service and the Sala has put into this, that we are just ecstatic about the grand reopening in 23. We are going to be working collaboratively over the next few months to begin getting ready. We hope that folks will come to Washington, D.C. to visit this completed site in its full glory, and really will be a monument and testament to Dr. Carter G. Woodson's life and legacy and his contributions to America. So now I'd like to open it up for questions or comments and conversation to go. We'll start with it. Sure. Right. In the basement. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Yeah, we didn't talk about the classrooms. There are going to be classrooms and conference rooms, meeting space in the basement that the community, Asala can host programming. You know, we can have, you know, book club, but all kinds of opportunities exist and possibilities for that being a gathering space for learning more about Dr. Woodson, and even, you know, our internship program that we have. So, and just as a quick thought, that there were two in terms of just the overall Asala NPS partnership, that this summer we did the Bisa Butler program, looking at the Quilting Douglas. So, and Marvin opened that up. So, you know, and that's on Asala TV. So, I mean, just goes to show the opportunities that we have been able to really help to uplift African American history and culture through this partnership. Marvin, you have a no? Okay. Anyone else? Please.
I just want to thank you all for this incredible presentation. First of all, I've been involved for a long time around NPS issues, and particularly thinking about partnership with scholars and organizations. And this is an amazing partnership that you all have tried to congratulations on your partnership. And my second question has to do with, if Woodson lifetime, did he have connections with NPS during his lifetime, trying to in any way get them involved in the 30s and doing were there connections there? I can say there were connections. This is what he wrote about in 1937. He talks about these, that African Americans are now interested in going to the places that we do. And he's very explicit about the football, flying, and very tumbling that time, because it's really there's a full like that. He mentions the Civic, home of Frederick Douglass, connections, sojourning food, and others. He says, these were the children, and he says, Negroes are, seeking places. And so that was really important, because it was the foundation of the understanding to say what people are different issues.
And I want to just follow up too on the partnership piece. There's also a great video of myself, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and Reggie Chappell, who served as the acting associate director of partnerships for the national office of the National Park Service, and hosted by Nicole Jackson, who runs the Blacks in Parks week in August. And so that lives out there online, where we talk globally about this partnership and that history of NPS and LaSalle together, not only at NACE, but then more broadly in terms of their work to enhance the scholarship at other African-American sites throughout the NPS system. So go ahead.
The other point that I did want to make though, and Robert Stanton, maybe you could give me the better details about this, but Charles Young worked with the Park Service, the Black colonel in the Army, and he was in the Sequoia National Park. So that's very early on. Okay.
That's right. Sure. Sure. Mm-hmm. Right. Sure. I do want to respond to that. That's a great point, Magdala, that and for the Zoom, I'll just kind of repeat the question. She asked, Magdala is here in the audience, and she asked whether or not we're considering expanding and expounding upon our partnership scope to include a lot of the community organizations and African-American women's organizations, and teachers and educators and education systems that Woodson had really, created a great network of, distribution for the materials, the journal, the bulletin, et cetera, that would go out to our community. And so the short answer is yes. And in particular to the grand reopening that's planned for 23, and I can't say that much about it because we still need to engage ASALA, but that we have done some preliminary thinking around what those organizations are. And many of them, that had affiliation with Dr. Woodson or that he had touched, we want them all involved in this grand reopening because we think this is an opportunity to really uplift how crucial and significant Dr. Woodson's role is and was and is today still in us still having this organization and this convening, and not only that, but the fact that the study of African Americans is a respectable and certainly widely accepted field of study across, the academic institutions that exist today. And so I think that Just Do is going to happen as a part of this grand reopening. So I think from a Park Service standpoint, our goal is to ensure that we just uplift this legacy, uplift the visibility of who Dr. Woodson was, and that we have this home now to really tell that story to the nation, that this is the real McCoy, we have the real thing, and people can come to it and really engage in what lessons that we are left with. That, as Vince said, this, I think Evelyn, this heirloom to, America. And so I know it's a gem, and it's because of all the work done heretofore. Yes, sir.
Really quick question.
Yes.
You said the name of the actor who was portraying. I missed that.
Sure. Dexter Hamlet, he is an actor for the Zoom audience. The gentleman in the audience has just asked who was the actor that we were referencing that has reenacted Woodson. His name is Dexter Hamlet. He's based in Maryland, and is on the theater scene in Maryland, but he's superb. Mr. Stanton. Okay. Okay. All right. Yes. Mm. You excluded, right?
Then the African-American employee told about his brother was in Vietnam and died, and they had to go to Fort Benning. So they went, the family identified the body, then on their way back, they want to stop, which of course people want to stop at a national park. But they weren't paying attention. They went in, it was not the day for African-Americans, and they had to turn around. And those were the stories. And this was in 2019, and I'm sorry to say, the National Park Service still will not let Mercer post that on their website. So those are the two stories. And so I'm not saying that he couldn't work that, but it just really wouldn't have at that time. And that's just my perception. But when you're excluded, you probably wouldn't have. I'm not saying they didn't, but that's another story of the Park Service.
But one of the points I really do want to make, what Woodson was saying in 1937, these were park sites.
No, and people went, yeah, right. So I was going to her question, would they have worked with the Park Service?
Yeah,
at that time?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. But the point is, and I think it's so relevant for for example, the African American Action Fund of the National Trust for Historic Preservation under Brent Leggs and Omar Eaton, who's here today. We had our sites. So when they went to the home of Paul Lawrence Dunbar, they went because they knew it was his home.
Exactly. And my grandparents
So
Smoky Mountain, everywhere.
absolutely.
So we went.
So we went to these sites that we knew were our sites, but then we had to push for recognition. That's what the Action Fund is doing now. Communities are saying, we have special places. We want those places preserved. And so this is what Woodson was advocating, because he knew Black people knew their history.
Yeah.
I just want to say that my heart is made glad, and I just want to commend you individually and collectively for bringing us thus far in enhancing our understanding and appreciation of the richness of Dr. Woodson's legacy. Notwithstanding, there's much work that we need to recommit ourselves to. I'm already got my pen here to mark a date down for the gate opening, because I want to be front and center
Yes,
in
sir.
living color.
You will be, you will be.
Let me just say on a technical consideration on the virtual tour, I really appreciate it. But this is just an area of a little sensitivity in terms of jurisdiction. Because in presenting it, if you were to open it with Woodson Park and the statue, one could readily conclude that's a part of the historic site.
Correct.
Whereas that's under the jurisdiction of the district government. So you just a technical point.
Oh,
to be
no, I appreciate
careful of.
that. I noticed that when I saw this version.
Yeah.
You know, the still shot at the very beginning, that the company they don't know that.
No, sure.
And so that is something I plan to correct, because that definitely should not be in there. Theo Foster.
First, I just want to thank everyone who spoke. This is a room full of distinguished scholars and civic leaders and administrators who built organizations. And so thank you all for this presentation. I can't wait to get to DC and check out this site next year. To Madela's question, I have a question that folks in the room should know. If Carter G. Woodson, and I want to keep the focus on him, is the father, right, of Negro history or Black history, who might the mother be? I might suggest Vivian C. Harsh, who is the first Black woman librarian in Chicago, and is the founder of a archive that is second only to the Schomburg in terms of public libraries in Chicago. And so does Vivian Harsh show up in any kind of way in this site in terms of his connections, right? And sort of to connect Woodson to Black women like Vivian Harsh, I think might readily, make those kinds of, Woodson certainly wasn't the only one, but in a community, a part of the movement, and certainly fueling that. But just curious if Harsh and her kind of collecting work with Woodson in Chicago and across the country really show up in that space.
I want to yield to Vince Vase to possibly answer that question. I'm obviously more partnerships and engagement. And so Vince is more closely aligned with the actual content and scholarship. So Vince, you want to?
You bring up an excellent point about the mother of Black history. When we did the planning for the Civic, we focused a lot on the individuals who interface directly with Dr. Woodson. So Nanny Helen Burroughs gets a lot of highlight, and of course, it's again building to that, and of course Mary McLeod Bethune, whose site is actually only 15 minutes walking from the Woodson home. And as we know, Mrs. Bethune, ran a Sala for well over a decade, and so she's figured very prominently in the Woodson home as well. We've even initiated a walking tour between the two homes to actually link them as well. So that's where we're at. However, in the true spirit of Dr. Woodson, the research goes on and the interpretation goes on. So you've inspired me to look into to Vivian Harshall there, so that we can, and who knows, and that's why there's also a portion of rotating exhibits that we'll have as well, so that as newer research comes to light, we can highlight those folks as well.
Yeah, let me support what Vince said in terms of Mary McLeod Bethune. She was the longest serving executive director of Asala. And according to the story, she's the one who recommended to him that he start the Negro History Bulletin to directly reach out to teachers and provide them material to teach Negro history in the 1930s and 1940s.
Right. Go ahead, Matthew.
My mind works this way. Please include the librarians. Some of them were in schools, others were in their local libraries, but please do not forget those. My mother was one of them.
Thank you.
Well, the librarians are still included because the Sala we have the Black Library, whatever the organization,
The Black Caucus.
what's it called? The Black Caucus of the Library Association.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of librarians who are here at this meeting and so they are definitely there.
Yeah.
The other is that Jarvis Givens has written a book on Woodson's role with teachers. And I'm not talking about professors, I'm talking about K through 12 teachers. And so we are going to make sure that in that neighborhood, because my father was a high school teacher and a junior high school teacher and principal who worked with him. So, and then after Woodson died, he actually, my father edited the Negro History Bulletin until his own death. And so the idea of teachers, and we still have that tradition with our Black History Bulletin now with Lavon Neal and Alicia Moore. So definitely we've got to work even harder. I heard you the first time, but definitely teachers and librarians are on our radar.
And just a plug for the luncheon today, which of course is the Carter G. Woodson luncheon. Jarvis Givens is our speaker, and he will be talking about his research on Dr. Woodson and teachers.
Yes. We got 2 minutes left, and so I just want to take a quick moment to shout out Melissa English Rice, because we just had an opportunity to work together in Birmingham for the World Games in the Birmingham National Monument, which is new to Park Service as well. Another important site and an important part of American history. And then Theo Foster and Majla Hamilton, my good friends from Birmingham. So thank you too for being here as well. Yes, one last question. Oh, comment. Go ahead.
Just a small plug, apropos of our conversation and the question earlier, there's several of us that are doing a session at 2 this afternoon on public places, hidden experiences, Black history related to national park sites that are not sort of designated in this spirit or whatever, but try to bring those stories to light. So I'd love to have anyone that's here to join us for that conversation this afternoon.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining this afternoon or this morning. It feels like afternoon now, but I really want to thank everybody and thank my fellow panelists, Marvin, Evelyn, and Vince. This has been great. Thank you. Thank you all.